Okay, we can go live now. Tashideli, Geshe, Tashideli, Katrina, and good morning, everybody, or good evening, wherever you are. Today we will have only a 1 hour teaching from 8:30 Pacific time till 9:30. I would like to make another comment that please use the chat box only for questions, and then we will gather the questions and hand them over to Geshe. For the following recitations, please go on our website on the event listing page, and you can download the PDF. Thank you. We will start with the recitation now.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, knower of the world, supreme God of beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and humans, to the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When, O supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paid 7 strides and said, I'm supreme in this world. To you who are wise, and I bow, with pure bodies, forms supremely fine, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, supreme God, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not, incomparable wise one, to you I bow. Great compassionate protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms, unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom, too well established in the trainings, the holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning and clouds, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the flow of faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, for land, sun, and moon. Imagined as a Buddha land and offer to you, may all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of their wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ratnam I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening listening to the Dharma. I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Michondo Carlo Chujaba, Kunju Chawa Jaba Tishin, Omboshishin, Rapsishila, Kenya, Shukatala Chachalo. Oh, yeah. Okay. All the time, what is Lamoche? Simjet Hamjagatundo, Simjet Hamjagatu to be a good concept in the Kunde, the Kibuchi, Sanja Yakomachi Natoversa, the Cheto, Sanja Yakoma Topsy. Jambatan Yaji Sanju Sim Yanda with Tawala Sobatambe. And then Chishu years something. Chunyangi something, Chunyan. Oh, the Tabata Samba Combachi, some Kuno, set them the Samba shoes, all this.
So at the beginning, we should think that we want to be able to work for the benefit of all sentient beings. But in order to do that, we need to attain the state, become a being, a Buddha who has removed all faults and developed all good qualities in order to be able to actually affect the welfare of other sentient beings. So we should think that we are going to engage in this Dharma, listen to these teachings regarding compassion and love, bodhicitta, the correct view, and not only are we going to listen to the teachings, but then reflect on them, meditate on them. And in this way, we should set such a motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh, Chambe Lembas. Then in Ninja Combetus, Chamba Combetus, Shivara, or Tinane. Tangum got Chefsoin. Oh, yeah, it is.
Nipa di carrera.
Oh. Oh, Tambuda Tangum the sheet to Vasira. You better let Chambe Lembas, Luara.
No.
Chambe Lembas. Oh. And then Ninja Combetin Bass, what in it under Nyawari, Tundra Social Combat and Chill Combat, Ninja Combetin Bass. And they had Chamba Comsuse. Then she on a chef one. Oh, dinner and a tambu Chambe Chill Bass, Ninja Combat Chuse, sharing better.
So here we are looking at the way of meditating on compassion. And so this is really divided into numerous points. The first of which is developing this kind of foundation of equanimity, of having this sort of equal view toward all sentient beings. And then we have the sort of moistening with love and compassion. That sort of is the second type of stage of meditating on compassion. And then we have this meditation on compassion itself by looking at the various types of sufferings of various beings, from hell beings and hungry ghosts through animals and humans and so forth. And then we get into the way of actually meditating on compassion itself. So here we have this meditation on compassion followed by loving kindness.
Oh yeah, that on the tongue. Tangum comedy Tambusia Swanganda, Sashi, Tandangaran to Tamalia, Chambatan Yingji, Chodich and the Chambatan Yanchi Orwa, Ranga Chambatan Yanchi or Rangana Mita Rangi Kawatan Yesa Pamala Soba, Udula Soba Karin, Tazula Chambatan Soyorno, the Chodich and the Chambarwa. That's Hangman Panyambachi Sores, Tandarangi, Niandela soba Tezola Chambi Yabanashi, and the Semja Kangarapa, Chibachi, Niji Combat to the Chibachi Ongura. Oh, Telia Tenica Soda. Somebody Semyam Gore, Tambutanium de Gores, Niji Champion. Oh, Tini, Tanium Yongo to San Caresana. Semja Shanda, Semja Tamje, Soso Sangana, Tawan Dola Tongue Mendoba Yambare. Rangi Kasa Yesan to Tawan de Tongue Mendoba, in Shanda to Tongue de Tawan Mendoba Tende Mare Sera. Rana Shin, Rangi Namina Shin, Rangi Yandina Shin, Tamje Tawan Dola Tongue Mendoba Yambare, Sekoran to Soso Munesiguara. Any Rangi Veneja, Konzo Tandanga, Sendi Janja Marwa, that's church. Number 20 is Tama Toma Kayamara Chimala Tambara. I tell you, said the Rangan Yandi, Hamala Soba, Yeni Dula Soba, Sazala Soba, Pubutula Soba, Kande in Hera. Oh, Jenny, Tender Majurbe, Joangama Namsa Tender Majurbe, Simchi and Omarese. Oh, Tia, Rangan Chana, Cutting Chiton, Sendi, Pamadan Yan, this or what Tezulia Zawa Yabanashi. Shandala Zawachiba Chaku with it. Tande Pamatanya Yendula Soba Chamji Yosaki concert to Nashi. Joangaman also concert Shanda to the chair or Esa. Such a ranking on the Sambatana, Yom Kugre, Samja Rangun Sambatana, Sam Yong Gurete, Churi and Chambata Rongamares, Jackie Ures, Tishegua, Tunjik Tisheswa, or the other teaching.
So we had begun by talking about the meditation or developing equanimity. And so equanimity is like this foundation for developing great compassion, because we all currently have love and compassion, but they're really sort of biased or partial love and compassion just for ourselves and our friends, our family, our side. And so we have to take that kind of sense of closeness that we have towards some and develop that for all sentient beings equally if we are to develop great compassion. And so in order to develop such compassion, we have to begin with this foundation of equanimity. So the reason that we need this is as a basis for our further development. And so one way that we think about this is that all sentient beings are equal in their wanting to have happiness and not wanting to suffer. So just in the way that we and our friends and our family don't want to experience suffering and want to have happiness, so too all sentient beings are equal in that regard. So that's one sort of way of thinking about this. But if we look at it too from our own side, we're not just talking about this life. When we begin to talk about Dharma, we're talking about countless lives. Our previous rebirths are beginningless, and so too are future rebirths. And so when we think about that, we can see that those who have acted as our mother and father, our friends, our family in this life, that's not the only sort of beings that have shown us kindness, but actually in previous lives, there's not a single being who hasn't shown us such kindness. So just like the kind of loving relatives that we have in this life, all sentient beings have acted that way toward us. So there's no way that we can distinguish in terms of kindness that beings have shown us. In this way, we can look and see it's not suitable to just have love and compassion for some and not have that for others, but rather we need to have this kind of equanimity, this sameness toward all.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they in your soda. Tande Pamala Soba, Ranka, and Yesatoge, Raliat in a panto, whichever nation. Semja Shen Tamjaki Yanko Namanamso. Rangi Tadov Ralia, Pandoche or Esco. Namjima, Remadon Yamako, Tadige, Tandaramaka, the paper Rangi Pama Yan Dula Sobachan, Senti Yandi Rangi Kala Cheva, Unatina, Shekobe, Tamba Che or Esura. Oh, Tene, Tare Sepa, Sendi Janja Shaju, Amar, the Tanda Sendi Rangi Kabun Yusesa, Pama Yandela Soba, Kabun Yuses, Kariuna. It's okay to get going on of Senate Trache or this. Pass several Tanga Yomar, two several Tanga Yomar. The uncle land is out on the Suyan ended of Sasoroa. Majundona Yungudua. Pomunda Choki Shubales, Pomoji Sanjay, Shubeke Shidua. Shiben dollars. Ne Keran to Tama, Naje and Pa Tama Sayores. Kerazugalia said to Mambuche Ores. Kanga Tinder Tsumbachulia, Tanda Mise Ngaliatini, Shenjachi Mares, Tanda Mise Shenjachi Mares. Trato Zuge, so Tanda Yakuchevanashi Ores, near the Zuge, Nema Tratic Tanda Tratic Chevanashi, Laga Tanda Mambuche Ores. Chazako Tonga Samutana, the plant over and did never say your mother. Take so Sendina Shingi, Pambacheva de Samutana, Shandala Tinesha Samutangus, Yam Korea Sungudwa, or Yam Kovitus and City Shedwa. Yeah.
So the kind of those beings who are our mother, our father, our relatives, those that we feel close to, those that we like, in previous lives, they may have acted as our enemies. And those that we consider enemies, people that we don't like, those have acted as our kind relatives in the past. So if we look at just this life, that's not really suitable. We need to think about previous lives. So those that we have identified in this life as being our enemy have actually shown us in previous lives the same kind of great kindness that those that we are closest to in this life have shown us. And those that we are close to in this life, those that we consider to be our mother, father, relatives, and so forth, they have also been harmful to us, have been our enemies in previous lives. We can't really even count the number of times that we have, say, killed each other back and forth. There is actually a sutra where a woman posed this sort of question to the Buddha, and we see that he responds that all are really the same in this way. We can't point to one being and say, well, this being has shown me more kindness than harm, because we have had these countless kind of relationships. There's no way that we can point to our relative in this life and say that they have never harmed us, or point to an enemy in this life and say that they have never helped us, because in past lives we have had countless relationships with them. And so in this way, they are all equal. This is one of the reasons that we develop equanimity toward all sentient beings.
Oh, yeah. That's in it. I'm condition. I'm condition. Tambo Rangi Tenisandelia, John Mangang, Chitang, Metasul Conguarno. Parmesim Jensi, Rangi Casadabchi, Megasabchi, Parmesim Jesum Yoda. Then the Parmesim Jetasul, Randan Java, Yagada to a kind Java Mangi Chitan Metazulia, Caselia, Javache, Casel Meka, Sequasi Omara. Corazon Tavandola, Tongamito Chibade, Sosungune Pasamutana Chibade, Consulia, Tandaka Mani, Teleca, Dele Meka Chibue Omara, Isamutangadua, Consuliere Omares. Oh, that consul de Sosu Techelia, Sosuni, Sosu Casan Yesapama Yendela Soba, Tanam Judrawa Yunde, Sosun Yendora. Oh, Jesu Chichilia, Tamalia, Chibare Chitawa Mato. Nang Penzulia, and it's Casure, Casel Cachita, Casel, Megatendecia Mares. What a puzzle down you from Sakansa to the social sendi, Pamanjela Soba, Tesuda, Chigbaris as well. Tandanga Tasa, Pasha Mato, Parmas Pasha Mato, Jom get a Shamato, Yongama Joy, Yabati Ordo. Change it sending Yendida Chigba, Parmesim Jet to social sendida, Yendida Chigbaris. Somewhere Tini Yamgudwa, Yamgudwa. Parmatita Susu Sende Kasan Yasanyam do Chibarachi, Yamsona, Tanyam Rachi, Kashela, Koduza, Kashela, Yaumaris and Mabaji, Sidarachi, Tavandola Tongam, and Chibari, Yamsona Sigara. Oh, and it travels some that travel to the Kalaka or no. In the travel to Chibu Pasha, Omare, travels to Yama, Ranganin, Tang Machuate. Tries to touch it to track it on my social service to come second the tram and the Chagra, Yabu Chagra, social tanda, but Megasa touch in a social samutan Savakon Yape, Jin Belty man and Mega charge you a chair. Or tea in the Trados had touch it to trust it by Shaki or Mother. Control down to let him at the ranking when it's in a young Amanamsa, go pant up with a tongue measure. This one that go send Pamanjela Sobota was Chipata with a stinyam yet of Chiba. Or Tinyam Sunan, Samba, Simje Thabkhe Namge Te to West. That's also draw Menge. And that's also draw young get the Sam Tanguara. Parmesimje, Chita, Lumbena, Parmesimje to share. And then social draw you set teacher. And this also mega teacher. That in a Simje Tama, Namge Te Kepe. Simje condition that $1 to him at the Chanjar. Rangune in a Rala Pant on the Chanjar. You will see a mess and I'm good talking in the same time. Some yam go. Oh, Jesus.
So here, when we are meditating on equanimity, actually trying to develop this, we start by viewing sort of a neutral person or a stranger, someone that we don't have a particular relationship with. So not a particular closeness or love, not a kind of dislike for that person. So we don't feel a sort of particular closeness or distance. We're not feeling those sort of pulls toward that person. And we begin by thinking that they are just the same as all other sentient beings. In that they want to have happiness and they don't want to suffer. And when we are able to have that kind of realization or that sort of feeling toward those that we don't necessarily feel close with, we don't really have any kind of relationship or any sort of feeling toward them, we begin to think about them in this way. That other than having sort of posited them as a stranger or sort of a neutral person in this life, there's no chance that we haven't had a relationship with them in the past. And they are the same in wanting to have happiness and not wanting to have any kind of suffering. And once we have meditated on that sort of neutral person, we then turn to those that are our friends, our relatives, those that we feel close to. And so again, we think about how other than just the sort of relationship that we have in this life, it's not definite in any sort of a way. And we try to equalize, make the sort of same feeling toward those that are our relatives, those that we feel close to, as those that we really don't have any relationship with. And then we take it a step further, going to those that we dislike, our enemies, which becomes a bit more of a challenge. We have to recognize that it's not any sort of definite enemy that we have there, but rather that's sort of like they're not one-sidedly completely our enemies, but rather just in this life we have designated them as such. But they have definitely been our relatives, our close friends in the past. And so we try again to see these beings as equal, those that are sort of neutral, our relatives, and then those that we dislike, those that are our enemies. And once we have been able to equalize all three of those types of beings, we try to expand out to all sentient beings, recognizing that they all are equal in wanting to have happiness and not wanting to suffer in any way. And they are all equal in terms of having acted kindly towards us in previous lives. So again, we progress, beginning with those that we don't have any sort of relationship with in this life. Then those that we do, those that we feel close to, finally to our enemies, and then trying to expand that all out to all sentient beings equal to space, and recognizing both of these components, that they're all equal in wanting to have happiness and not wanting to have suffering, and also that they have acted kindly towards us. They're not sort of one-pointedly our enemies or anything like that, where we should have these feelings of closeness and distance.
Oh, yeah. Ani chambe chu lemba cha sero sashi re nyam suna tele chu tang ku na shi chambe sem jetene lemba cha ku re sero o te condition chambe sem lemba cha sero ni ji sabu tamne thangmal tangyam ji cha suna ne yong ge chamba ina da da chandu chamba ina da chamba de chi da ni yong gu ara yong ge chamba se de da ngan zo sangme ma che ba chi ba re chi je se du sa ma she she ro. There's a lot of my Namjung as a marsh tended to suicide of the Tadalian Dura, Tatan the Chamba Kundu said the Wada Trendy Chambase, New Girl, no danger. Yum Chasona, and it's Yum Chatako, Yam Chamba, it's hard on social permanency, Nemache or some. Tatan the Wada Trendy Chamba Kongudua. Oh, Tenica, Chambe Lamber said. 아니 저는 이제 공부하래. 탐제 영어도 통교하다. 이도 뭐 지발에 나온다고 통교하라. 나 맨드서는 잠바 용마로 콘도 연구라. 계속도 거 Tene chambe chulen barche ne ta nyingji koyan go tso gore so gora ti so so nyingji komde kande kongurs na chida kamsum gi simje tamje simje kande chine ro ko tenge simje kande chine nyingji se de nyingji komgen de to de che komse de ma de tende samgyu ho ma de namgyu nga zu tende sko de to ko le da nyomu ba wa ge shawa de jone ko tenge changma se kuba yenge kyo de bata Yunge Sama Judge the Mana, Kubatan Jana, some Jawad Sigara. Or Tiduko comes from the court and gets him to Sama. Any Tunge Tunge, Yure Tunge, Kavan Duchi, Tunge, some Chirigi. Any call court do sometimes also taking some get to Sama Sigara. Oh, there's a Sama Tamjete. Tunge, Yure Tunge, Kavan Duchi, Tunge, so one nani. And it call a court do sometimes. Then it died. Chidani come to say. That teacher is social changing to come to say, Daniel in a country to say, Kerge, Nyo to make country, Chaniel country or Sawa Serva. May check button in the say she check when I dread Sura. Sawa Serva. Chanelia Save Tunga Serva. Sawa Rapsa Serva. That in the China Tana China take when the some Tangora. Sawa Rapsa. Nan me se ta sobo kanga ya me bande tanda simatun soanya danga yorangara mi ule yungu metatan chikuya mamu yungu sawa rapsa se nan me tunjum sengera chiksu changma ruru se ma rirap tende su yungu che jomyate so tunjum tingna se tikyab se tu se tende yang su se yang koran jing nyaw na le jare jare ti tu jare dwa Tante Tunga Yadu Yakura Jingri Chigora, Yongam Lego, Jinko said as you left. And I can't do her, Bekanga can't do her. Then I can't yaso, but you just say, Yaso, Tamabu Shaker, and you have to get machine, Garis of one of Visita. Oh, the Imbasha. I yaso. That on that Nyalia, Sekbe Tunga. And it can't taxi the Sobo Chagwach and Namchang Mushing and the Mule Yorba. Nyawa Chandra Mule Yusha. Mechi and do I Chagwa Jamni Church Tangi Yora. Oh, didn't Samatan to me and get some jet to Samatan Yora. Nyawa say, any Idalia, Kala Sajume, Shindunga Yorda, Milum by Yora. Says on Merit they say, and it says, Chogan to do Jira Roshi to Shandakpa, Jirasian, God, the Samachu and the Desira. Consider. Italia, Tibet, Dogbetonge, and the Srobo Kambucha, the Otted, Kalaraji, Sire, Reduce and the Parka, Nachi, Reduce, Sanama, Samado, Mibel Metro, oh, Tende, get Kumbiordo. It has and don't dang it as a Mitoyava, Tozula, Samatangura. Yongudua. Nima Tagbar is a Tondula, Tasho, Songudua, Bombulutu. Rishendo, don't do the tennis. Now that to the 20 under your marto. That to the 20 yardo. Now that Chandra or me, Lumbali again. Say no get taxi and get to the tomatoes come the Yoda. Okay, don't do me. Don't do that yet out just. That's the task, them the Silmara. Or consulting country to some. And the Tunget in the Yard of Sangara, now was your mother. One of them do some language in a teenage tonsil and such a Agataco to this taco or some tadali. Yoida to real Maki Yabote, Kindle Kin Tacoci, me colors Canerayo, some Tatemado, Cataya the Tindekimidua. That is the outside. Rather Lulu Sober to the chili chick Sae to Medua, as you making some Tododa. There's a some go yard. I don't have you to be that to Temutank Surasi Sorgodoa. Did you, Marto? Our touching this to me, you could do something. Sorgo Yarto, Tandruta Jatawacha, Tandrutung to Samata, the Zuli Misset at the Janus or Tunga Conguera. Any Miller Yanko, Sosukanina, Dramandra Mambo Yardo, Pama Trombala Soba, Sasa Trombala Soba, now so nothing Dramandra, the Zukanga Samatan in Nijicom Sigora, Kaduka Tunga Cardinal, the Nijicom Gordo, Milia. so somebody Maduya, the Vachet Manibata, Meduba taught the power sober, to what the Chawas and the Mambuyoda. Tinganzungus told what the social Kani to the Tunga Karichon to do some I got some Tunga and the Chons of Kadrasa. So come go Ye Tunga, Hala and Dollar to in a Tuzuya Tunga. And the Tunga maybe in a call. She could hear some shit. I didn't quote yesterday. How could do hard to did to get some of that. No, that don't do hard. I didn't hire and dollar member to some day from me hard to dinner. And to make a yomar the cool and you just watch it. Thing is, come, the standard coat and the chill get the water. To me, so the order to make a yomar, town of the state, the water. I know things I do. Oh, it is a cabin to see to me said in that order. So Rawa Mebas and Yamo, the one get less on it. Do you want anything is a come the call? Joy was talk with some comes it and it under some dangle had of some milk had to scale. Taina could Keji Junior, less and that's each and my saying to talk about stigma to Yawa that Tandulianti. What is a ready to make some ambassador? It's okay, some to Angazunam duty, some tomato. Oh, today some tennis, Chitan and Simjet Tamjet Tom Jamne. Rohata comes from Simjet Tamjet. Yamoga Shaman to June leg, Kawada Mikiwasa, Kawasana, Tendula, the Miller, Jena, Tungan, Yangadusam, Simjet Tamjet, Koya Tungele, Chanasam. And those sometimes the Dungarazo, Medrabzimba, they said Simjet Kashe, Burab, the Yonjete, Benal, some good one. Ko kare tongune yi do re toje chonggo ra ti na shi re songgo ra kham sum bu de ko me ba wa na shi ge tong ye ran shi chen re ta na ga ra zo te wa re zo chor je chi le sa bu da chi sa je ya ti na ma chom do na shi ra o ti na shi ti ni tong ye sam ko re songgo da o tin de re jing ga zo rob ji chin so o ta mang da shi kong da ya
So here, then, when we have created this sort of equal ground, again, it's like we're leveling a field to be able to plant the seed of compassion. And here, the second stage is sort of developing or watering this ground with the water of loving kindness. So again, we can talk about loving kindness in the sense of the sevenfold cause and effect method of recognizing all sentient beings as having been your mother and so forth. That sort of affection that we feel for them in the development of that kind of bodhicitta, where we're thinking about sentient beings and seeing them as like pleasant, as something that we feel a sort of closeness to. And then we can get into the kind of love wherein there's that desire that they have happiness. So we should just recognize that there are these two sort of different types of love here. And we begin with this kind of loving kindness of feeling close to them, which is necessary for then having that desire that they have happiness and having the desire that they be freed from suffering, which are the attitudes of compassion and love. And so we begin by thinking about the kinds of sufferings of cyclic existence, thinking about this sort of as a whole, as a general kind of a thing. And again, when we are meditating on compassion, it's not as though you're doing so from a sort of higher up place looking down on others who are suffering, sort of having this almost sort of pity for beings that are suffering, but rather we should have this kind of compassion that is in recognition that we are all under the control of karma and the afflictions. All of those beings that are cycling within cyclic existence are afflicted by at least one of these three types of dukkha or suffering. And in this way, we should recognize that they're all subject to the sufferings of samsara. So there's sort of a general meditation on suffering, and then beginning by looking at all of the various sort of individual sufferings, looking at the various sufferings of hell beings in the ways that they have to suffer in terrible kinds of heat, in these unrelenting sort of situations where maybe they are being crushed between buildings, or maybe they are subject to being like cut into pieces, or there are various hells where those that are sort of wanting to fight it out will have to fight with each other, and then it seems like they've died, but they're actually actually revived and will fight again. And so there are all kinds of sufferings that one can endure in the various hell realms. Again, these are not things that we have direct sort of vision to, but we can see the types of suffering that are endured sort of in different forms within our human realm. And so there are like as well, the cold kind of hells where one is subject to these freezing conditions and terrible, painful kinds of suffering from that cold. And so in this way, we can go through the various types of sufferings, thinking about hungry ghosts, thinking about the kind of starvation that they endure, this constant sort of searching for food, and maybe say they're able to find food, but they can't actually swallow it or ingest it. There's some sort of obstacle to their being able to nourish themselves. So this is the kind of suffering that type of being experiences. But we can also see, again, there are humans that experience famine, that experience dying from starvation. And so then we go to the animal realm. And when we look at the kind of sufferings of animals, actually Nagarjuna said that we should really look at the animals and not sort of like we're watching a movie, but really in a way that gets at the suffering that they're experiencing, that recognizes if I were to take rebirth in that existence, this is the kind of suffering that we would go through. And so we can reflect on the kinds of sufferings. I mean, even if one is born as like a dog or a goat or a sheep, I mean, having to be slaughtered and all of the kinds of, even if they're not, say, in the wild where they're eating one another, there's all sorts of suffering that animals experience. And so we should really look at them. We should be aware of that, not just in like, oh, I'm watching this sort of movie of something happening out there, but really connecting with that suffering. And then we get to humans that are subject to birth, aging, sickness, death, the kinds of losses that we have to experience, having to meet with bad conditions, not being able to get what we want. And so there's this kind of sense of connecting with that experience of suffering to really elicit the feeling of, may they be freed from that. How wonderful it would be if they could be freed from this kind of suffering. And so then we get up to the sort of God realm where they're not experiencing the sort of dukkha of abject suffering, but they experience the kind of momentary change that when they meet their time of death, they're going to have to fall into a lower realm. And so too with the sort of beings that have taken birth in the meditative concentrations or the formless realms, although they're not subject to this sort of the suffering of dukkha or the sort of the dukkha of suffering or the dukkha of change, they still have that pervasive suffering of conditioned existence. So even those that are in these high meditative concentrations are subject to being momentary, changing moment to moment. And when the karma that led to that rebirth is expired, they're going to fall into lower realms. And so it's really important that we reflect on this in a way that elicits a kind of feeling, elicits this understanding that all of us, so long as we are under the control of our afflictive emotions and karma, are going to be subject to all of these types of sufferings. And this is the kind of like genuine wish that we be freed from these sufferings that we need to elicit. Because most of the time we don't think of these as suffering. It's like we're a sort of moth drawn to a flame. It's like we're jumping directly into that flame, thinking that it's happiness, thinking that we're getting something good, because we don't actually recognize it as being in the nature of suffering.
Oh yeah, that and thing is in the rooms. Ne go tamjet around the Ninji conversation with one. And things in do there to Susan Arapan and Ninji Simbre Samutan, so Chibu Samutan. And some jet to me another Samutan. I don't hate that Tenachima room, some sort of Changiora. The neg of the Songiora, Tingajilan do Yaro, to the Ninja Congior, Chamba com Chawa com Chanju, some carcom, so Chibu, some Tangiora. That in a pound rose on a chicken and rosiness of Cholam Tamjet around. To do Lebacheviora. Around Nambu, some time to the better condition, so Chibutete. Some jet tamjet the order the way to the Tonga Jesuache. And Rosana Nambira Chibara. She should do some initiated Nambu the Chibara mother take a leg with take a Mavera. The cold Lebachev what to do. Don't do that, Tonga, the meet Tonga Yankish to na. Tonga the trainer, some sata. The auto of the Yagarich to Namsa Chesuraja, oh, do a cote, so we are going to Penjo Yabudo, or Namukusun, so what Yabudo, some such Chesuraja, Yawada tended a Kawakom Gora. 동해들 동해 전도시 수수 강변의 로바체네 제거라 딜 디딜 레버세오라 아주 말을 저도 일 때는 당도 로도 제텐데 오늘 비가 두두 디지에마도 따와를 더 대게 말아 나라저 삼을당 배절로 제시티 잘래 텐데 임버사 당원에 비가 레드서 디딜 레버세고 알아 어디 인도서 졸람 탐제도야 론데스 잠바다 니지다 자와다 땅용생게 나라지 지조나 로에 값을 레버세고 알아 대로 장에 전달이야 소수 집부대저 삼을당 저로 장교라 섬주 야교라 섬주게 아니 지조나 레드산테 레버세고 알아 이제 말lem나니 스랍한도 그 마저라 어디 보통 아주 로차서 이제 인지 공부를 인지 공부도 마 방제 송구도 어야 안되네 마 로션
So here we then get up to this point where it says that we should meditate on compassion, whether we are engaged in one-pointed meditation or pursuing your ordinary activities. Meditate on compassion at all times. So this is sort of talking about how in the context of, say, sitting on our cushion, doing a formal kind of meditation practice, we develop these attitudes of compassion and love and bodhicitta and so forth through thinking through these various sufferings, through reasoning through these various topics in order to really elicit a kind of feeling, to get some sort of progress, to train our mind from that kind of meditation. But we should then, when we get up off the cushion, we should keep that in mind. It should have some sort of an impact. It should arrive in our everyday activities. It shouldn't sort of be like as if we are just sort of thinking about it on the cushion, but we don't actually have that kind of sense when we're out in the world. Like when somebody has something good happen to them, or we really have a feeling about that person, we think, oh, it would be so great if they could be freed from this suffering or really get this thing. We should have that kind of attitude toward all beings at all times. That's what we're trying to do by training our minds. So it's like when you study something in school, it's not just that you are able to learn it so you can use it in school. It's to be able to learn it outside, or to be able to use it outside of that context. And so too it is when we are sitting working with our minds. We're working with our minds and developing those attitudes in order to be able to take that out into the world, into our practice. So that's the real point of this, is that it's not just doing it to be able to do it on the cushion, but to be able to have this at all times in our life. So then we will pick up on the sort of stages of how we go about meditating on compassion.
Oh yeah. 당은 주트림 되는 마사바팅 봐. 민지 땡이 제란 도장론 저람 탐제 동안 롱데 두 탐제도 심전 탐제라 공부하셔서 민지 공부해서라. 다 공주 간데레서 민지 공주기 좀버디 셰거라. 이내 만인지 공주디 개버 셰거라. 그럼 방한제 담부 디섬도 되는 디섬도 셰거라. 호마 코너 자식이 처남라 지게 매베 동해 남냠소녀와 냠소녀와 통해 공부하자. 담부들이야 ninji tozo tambo soso kasa nyese tene kia de lela yora. Tapi tanyo mina chida mine che su tichani lela doa. Tene su nyende che tene tra komgu doa. Ninji de komgu ta thoma soso nangmi kanyi inji la sokba ta pama la sokba ta soso chende kaba lo ya cheba yona na dina shi che pasam tangora thoma tene samta. 다 티나시 심지어 강가 코란 중문에 대원들을 동해면도 치고를 랑문에 천디점을 마도 겨왕가 말이야 되는나시 집에 치고를 섬다기 공도시에 삼을 두슬랩 그거라 토마 코난 자식이 쏘남라 지게 매베 동해 나서 냠손용화 공부자 오세 소순 자식이 쏘리야 다 민대신에 미 동해 소수 가분에서 강가 담면도 마음부 용여도 Pamam Debola Soba, Roba Debola Soba, Pubadula Sotungi, Chida Mabunya, Nasala Soba, or Tezuko Samuta. Take it some banny, Tungi, 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 Caban, Tungi, Soba Nasu, Samutan, Tambudun Zashi, Kichone, Casan Yasatine, Gotu Sungudua. Toma Conan Zashi, Gichonam, La Chige, maybe so condo shebe. Tungi Nazo Yamson Yama Combarcha Ose. Tene, Simje. Nyamba ni jesi te chele ya tene simje nyamba nyeji chida mebar tone simje tamje soso chedi nyende ki chotan tsungbarwa rangla yaku cheba ta rangla nyebu yoba ta kyawa ngama namsus ta nganzu lecho na samlutandu chendi kyangja samlutandu mera kyawa ngama da chima kanga didul samlutangu yora kyawa ngama da chima didul samlutandu chendi ko tondu re re te yora yusam chire mato zondo yara shema yongju de keshara songsara de yor tezu chama susu didul siku yora ngama yaku cheba de yaku jawu tangore Tandar Yakucheva Yenda, Oticha, Mamba Yongu to the social didul Sigura, Raja Sochendi Janja social didu, Yonia di Chimato, Chima Panja Samu Madana, and it shows some Yongu Mato. Shows some Tanduza, Samba Kora, Jachambusko Yara, Luchaban Dugina, Semda, Yawa the social use, Chin, you do steady and Samatana, and Yaga the door, Karina to you. Sanjay Kovan Toga Chagin, Kale Yagin, something Kave to Ziorna. Or this Samdani, Kakati, Gurmad, Chendi Kanja Samdan, Tetu Kalayoya, maybe some Raja Korgado, or Diki somebody to Zude. So the Kachambo Samata. Talk about them by the married and you can chase a Joton Dandiso. Tenesimje, or Tenesimje, Yambani, Chedra Mebaras, Simja Tamje. Sendi Raganya de Yamba Yakujaba Yambani, Sama Chibarism, Keva Mebani, Tone, Chidameba Tone, Simjan Tamjani, Tag and Yandu Jurba, Kona or Yamdus, Simjan Tamje, Sendi, Pamala Sobani, do Jurbanasi, Tamje Jawangamanam, Juru Aresam, Yandu Juba, Kona Remato, Yandu Jurmanu, Sani Omar, Tanda Kijis in the Washington Omardo, Tangi Omardo. Temba in a ranch on Amagarazna, the military, the Mambo, the military to do permanent carriages, and the water say, you know, tennis Kashe, so cheat by kid of the delicate, your cigar, or dear Lutucci or the Tati, about the time as water. Shady Puina, Moga Puina, Trombani, or door, Trombani, Lapsan to each other. Trombani, Trombachi to the Pajo. Tanya Burache, Chamgumedua, Kabumedua. Any Suja Tromba de Baba Amache, Puche, Puli Namache, Yodua. Any Condolia Nyaso Sage, the day Chambuchi Chingji or Tina Yamambosa Shagara. Any Baba the Nimani Kalasar and Chichen Yade de Simje, and the Kalas Chigora. Or Tisha, any Pajo de Tromba de Condo Chambo Yomar, Pajo de Baba Amache Puchiche, Pudi Kimeche Ora. Or tea didn't put the Suja de Liang put the Sazani Ora. He put the Suja Kime Pomodele Chagba Chagi or Kabuyong Ora. In the Konzo Kamar de Pajode. Tene Chemako Pamani de Tondora. Suja Pamani de Tondo, Baba de Tromne, Tony Koti Yamabosesa, Kora Nyaleke de Ora. Baba de Nyaleke Sora. And Amade Tondo, Amade the now the Shenjar, which is a taco, Tondul Kenny Kiddy Kilkidera. And a Pajogi Magbadi, trying the Magbadi Shini Kodi, Consulti Magba Pomu Pulikera, Pur Pure Dera. And a could put the Skora Pug to Sunyagra, Sasham Busigra, Panganya there, and a could Shasagar and Yashasavati, Baba. Tondoneti, Yadi Nimate Kadukese, Sadeve Kadukere. And a kid is a tolerant of the Paju Sever, Amate or a Yakama. And it is in this scene, when she is in our Pasha Sashi Malatase, Babesha Savora, Amal Tambuja Paju Sevora, Magasa Tradiku Pangarnya, Sachim Busigora, Busigora, Koya Chula Kambutose, Koya Chulita. Graduate, Nimbuka Medotin, or Atina Shingan to Jubu. Oh, this is good now. That's my
So then it goes into the kind of stages, the steps of meditating on compassion. And so it says here, begin by meditating on your friends and relatives. So here we begin, it gives sort of a more extensive explanation of how we actually go about doing the meditation on compassion. And we begin by thinking about our relatives, our friends, those that we feel close to. So as opposed to the sort of equanimity where we began with a neutral person and then move to our those that we're close to and then our enemies. Here we begin by really thinking about those that we feel close to, because it's easier for us to generate this wish that they be freed from suffering. So when we look at those that are dear to us, our mother, our father, our relatives, our friends, our children, and we think that they are subject to these three types of dukkha, these three types of suffering, we recognize that we wish them to be freed from that, from having this sort of closeness with them. But we expand by recognizing too that although they have been sort of helpful to us in this life, we have considered them to be good to us in this life, we're really not just thinking about this life. When we begin to talk about dharma, it immediately extends beyond just this life, because really in this sort of scheme of things, this life is just a moment. It's a very short period of time, and we should really be thinking about our experiences beyond just this life, thinking about future happiness and future suffering. And this kind of thought that comes is when we are talking about dharma and engaging in dharma, it's really important to have this kind of wide ranging or sort of long-term thinking that our mental continuum is going to continue on, although we are going to give up this body. The sort of things that we experience in this body are very temporary, and thinking just about sort of the good things for this is thinking very short term. We need to think longer term than that. And when we begin to think beyond just this life, we recognize that all beings that we encounter have at some point acted with the kind of closeness and love that those close relatives have shown us in this life. And so it's other than not recognizing or not remembering, recalling the kindness of those beings, we can't say that they haven't acted in that capacity. So again, there's the famous sort of story, whether it was Shariputra or Malgadhyayana, there's a story that's sort of summarized in a verse, which talks about there were these two kind of towns where there was a great dislike between them. We had these two families, and there was one family with a father who was a fisherman, and so he had like a pond in his yard, and he would continually catch fish from this pond, and he had a son with a wife. And there's another family that was very sort of their enemies, and there was kind of a secret liaison between the wife of that family and the husband of the other family. And so time goes on, and the mother and father of this family have passed away, as well as actually the sort of enemy family has passed away. And so they're looking on this scene, and the Buddha is able to see the previous lives of these various characters. So in this family, they're still sort of continuing to catch fish out of this pond and eat them. And the father, who had caught so many fish out of that pond, he was reborn as a fish within that pond. And the mother who had died, she was reborn out of her attachment to this household. She was reborn as the family dog. And then this woman has had her baby, and it turns out that this enemy that they had was reborn as this human child. And so observing the scene, they say, well, you're eating your father's flesh and beating your mother while you coddle your enemy in your lap. Isn't samsara funny? Like, isn't it sort of ridiculous the way that our relationships change? So in this scene, it's encapsulated the way in which our relationships are not certain, are not determined, but rather we're continuously sort of flowing through different relationships with beings. And we should recall that they have all acted in the capacity as our dear loved ones.
Oh yeah, that tambun zashi was so casus in yes to don't energy samatana to the chandu comra. Oh, Jenny, Chelia, Tungenazo with Yamson, Combat. Toman zashi swanam la chige maybe Tungenazo Yamson or Tove combat chao sera. nyingji kongurese. Tene simje nyamba nyejesu, tene simje shenda samade rangi zashi dan tsungba, checha meba, kebar meba tongne se. Simje tamje ni taage nyendu joba kona o nyamdu yonsu samshin, parme so namla kombu tene parme simje tosu, randan jawa menge namju kabuda, chata nyenda tende kege jawa menge parme simje tosu kongurese. Tene nyamba nyeje chita meba tongne se. Simje tamje ne taage nyendu joba kona osu parme simje tosu, jawa ngama namsu taage nyendu majuro me sam kabu nyeburo pama nyendela soba majuro me sam taage nyendu jorwa kona osu nyendu joba janja yinsam kichi pene ngoma shimba samato jawa kadu yina ko pama la soba nyende tanchi kasa nyesa jorwa shaji yinsam gore nyendu joba kona o nyamdo yonsu samshin parme chola komba chaos parma tosolia susu nyendeta chikba chungba chotana namjune nganzu soso nawandro se nawandro nawamandro se nawamandro se dogro tende memba se ko sama nawandro sogora pata dune ko trayen samsa tata dusara tayo tende memba sogorna simje tamje daga nyendu joba kona o soso nyendu majuba chigya me pama nyenye dole soba majuba mesa yonso samshin se parme cho namla kombato parme simje to rang chendi tanya sa ke simje ta nyamba kombore se kange je telan za shege cho shin do nyingji te nyambar shuba te se parme simje to so so za shen na shinge ta ta chibare je chongso na sigora o shuba juba te je choju simje tamje la kombare ne choju simje tamje la pa kombore kange se tandine nyingji di shira ka se nyingji kombe nambase nyingji chenpo kebe tse di shekidwa. Kange tse puchungu se amachile puchungu jebe shindu pe tsa chenpo che suyo bache. Kange tse puchungu nyingdu tukba su pe nyingne pe kabu yo se je. Te tungen shibu je pe narni teyo ne tungen war jo pe ma shindu ma te ne puti tungen le tena samche tsawa shuk chenpo kegirwa. O te tse je simche tamche le ya chikba kegido ne tungen de tendo ne nyingji chenpo se de toba re se. Tende namba chenji tsawaji keso na tele nyingji chenpo segres, tele nyingji chenpo ming toba res ora. Kange se tonge wa chuwe ma shindu tangi shindu tonge wa dembe namba ngange chukwa teche semje tamchala sem nyambar gyurwa teche tsokwa shechawa nyingji chenpo yonde tsokwa res, ngone de kia res. Nyingji chenpo ming ya toba os, o tiba de chikyo na shasha kuja.
So here then we begin this meditation on compassion by thinking about those beings that we are close to. So we again begin by meditating on your friends and relatives. Recognize how they experience the various sufferings that have been explained. So again, we think about the kind of suffering that they are experiencing and elicit this thought of, may they be freed from that suffering, that attitude of wishing to free them. And then having seen all sentient beings as equal with no difference between them, you should meditate on sentient beings to whom you feel neutral. So those that are neutral, that we don't really have any kind of relationship with in this life, we should recognize that they're all equal toward us in terms of the kindness that they have shown us in previous lives, that all beings, even those that we don't feel a relationship with in this life, have acted in this way, showing love and compassion in the past. And so because of that, we shouldn't view them as differently than we view our those that we determine as being close to us in this life. And so when the compassion you feel towards them is the same as the compassion you feel toward your friends and relatives, meditate on compassion for all sentient beings throughout the 10 directions of the universe. So when you are able to then be able to feel this kind of compassion toward all sentient beings without any kind of distinction between them, we should then extend that out toward others. Now, usually when we encounter beings beings, we're immediately kind of labeling them, thinking about like, oh, that's my enemy, or oh, this is someone that I feel close to. But if we are instead able to have this kind of feeling toward them, that they are in which we recognize their sort of suffering situation, and also recognize that see them as having acted kindly toward us, then we are able to have this similar wish, this thought that they be freed from their sufferings in a kind of equal way. And so then the measure of having generated this compassion is then in the next section, where it says, just as a mother responds to her small, beloved, and suffering child, when you develop a spontaneous and equal sense of compassion toward all sentient beings, you have perfected the practice of compassion. And this is known as great compassion. So when we have that kind of feeling of closeness, of wishing to free sentient beings from their sufferings in the way that a mother would want to free a suffering child from their suffering, that kind of feeling equally toward all sentient beings, that sort of aspect of mind toward all, is the measure of having generated this attitude of great compassion. So that's where we will stop then for today.
I think so. I think so.
So we'll stop there.
And thank you, Katrina. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will next week return to a 2-hour teaching. And thank you for your understanding. And we will do the recitation now.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and our spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous action spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losong's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayame. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzing Gyatso Chenrezi, may you stay until samsara ends.
I think so.
진짜 제마제요.